All right, here we go. Now, I did a whole series of these videos around this time last off season, and they were pretty popular. We're going to do them, or a version of them anyway, again this season. Keep in mind, these are not prediction videos. I do in-depth prediction videos, usually starting in June for 40, 50, 60 teams. I go through game by game, try to predict an overall record. That's not what these are. These are strictly schedule analysis videos. I look at a team's schedule. I try to figure out, okay, do I think this team's going to be better than last year or worse than last year? And is their schedule easier than last year, harder than last year? What about their away games last year versus this year? Cross-conference games, non-con games, the difference between the two, and just a schedule analysis. I think you guys know what these are. I'm going to do a whole series of these. Be sure and let me know in the comments down below some teams that you guys would like me see do on these schedule analysis here, and let's get started. Hey, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well. Hey, subscribe to this channel and hit the thumbs up. It's free to do, doesn't take any time at all, and it's a huge help to me. Subscribe and hit the thumbs up. It's time for some schedule analysis videos, and I'm going to start with my Georgia Bulldogs. Yes, clearly Georgia is my favorite team, but I'm a college football fan. I just love college football. Georgia's my favorite team, though, so we're going to start here. Now, I think everybody knows the sort of the case with last year. It was a weird year. Normally, when I do these videos, the schedules that we're comparing are pretty similar. 12 games, 8 or 9 conference games, and then you have the 3 or the 4 non-conference games, depending on which conference it is we're talking about. Of course, that's not the case this year. You had weird schedules, different types of schedules in all the different conferences last year. So in the case of the SEC, where Georgia is, they went with a 10-game conference-only schedule. Normally, 8 conference games and 4 non-con games. Last year, of course, just the 10 conference games. One of those 10 games for Georgia, the Vanderbilt game, ended up getting canceled due to COVID and not played. So Georgia had a 9-game regular season last year. Of course, they went 7-2 in the regular season with losses on the road at Alabama early in the year and a loss to Florida at a neutral site game in Jacksonville in the middle of the year around Halloween. Finished 7-2, second place in the East. First time in 4 years that they failed to win the division. Second in the East. Did make a New Year's Six bowl where they beat Cincinnati in one of the better bowl games, really, of the entire bowl season, finishing 8-2 with a top 10 ranking. How does this schedule last year compare to this year's? Well, like I said, totally different. Back to the normal schedule for this year, at least fingers crossed. It looks that way. Let's hope that it stays that way. Back to 8 conference games this year and 4 non-conference games. So let's start with Georgia's non-conference games this year, which of course is going to be totally different than last year when we didn't have any non-conference games. One of the biggest games of the year coming up week 1 for Georgia. 2 top 5 teams, at least heading into the season. I know the AP and the coaches' preseason polls don't really come out until a few weeks before the season. Everybody else puts preseason polls out, in January. Some people do. Anyway, regardless of what you think about Georgia or Clemson, they're both going to be in the top 5 of every single preseason poll that comes out. So you're going to have a top 5 matchup here at a neutral site, most likely played in Charlotte. Now, there's some attendance concerns right now with having a game in Charlotte. If they're not able to get those worked out, it's possible the game could be moved to Atlanta, but that's a decision that will be made a couple of months down the road. My bet is by the time the game comes around, the attendance issues will be a thing of the past, and we'll be able to put 60 or 70,000 people, whatever Bank of America Stadium holds, there in that stadium and play the game there. But that's Georgia's week 1 game. Huge non-con game there against Clemson. Obviously, this is a harder non-con game than anything we had last year, as we didn't have any non-con games last year. But even if we did, hard to find a harder non-con opponent than a top 5 team. This would be a big game. One of those games that everybody's talking about all off season long. You got a couple of them, Alabama and Miami play early on. You have several other big non-con games. This is right up there. This is as big as any non-conference game we'll see in the 2021 regular season. Georgia's got a lot of returning talent on offense, a lot of returning talent on defense too, but some key holes, particularly in the back end secondary. How's that going to work out against Clemson with the ukulele there at quarterback, who had a couple of games experience under his belt from last season when Trevor Lawrence got injured and couldn't play for a couple of games, and he looked really, really good. You have to believe that's going to continue to be the case. Justin Ross comes back at wide receiver for Clemson. Huge game there. Georgia then gets their first home game of the season against UAB, a group of 5 school. A decent group of 5 school, not on the level of a Cincinnati or a Boise State or a Central Florida or last year Coastal Carolina. Some of these group of 5 teams that we see creep up into the top 20, top 15, top 10 from time to time. Not that good, but a decent group of 5 school. Still should be a relatively easy game for Georgia at home, I would assume. The other non-con games are towards the back end of the schedule. November 20th at home, we play Charleston Southern, the Buccaneers, probably the worst team on our schedule this year. No disrespect to Charleston Southern, but clearly, even if you hate Georgia, you know this game won't be much of a matchup. And then we finish things up this year with Georgia's traditional in-state rivalry game that comes at the end of every regular season, except for last regular season. We play at Georgia Tech. So there's your 4 non-con opponents. You have the traditional at Georgia Tech. You have a big non-con opponent on a neutral field to kick things off with Clemson. And then you have 2 home game non-con opponents against sort of inferior teams, Charleston Southern and UAB. Worst case scenario, you would maybe thinking 3-1 there for Georgia if they were to drop that Clemson game. No real reason to expect Georgia to lose any of the other 3. I do think Georgia Tech will be better in 21 than they were in 20 or 19, but they still have a ways to go recruiting-wise, in my opinion, before they're really able to compete with a team like Georgia. We'll see. It is an in-state rivalry game. You do see weird things happen sometimes. Georgia will be a considerable favorite in that game, though. Now let's take a look at their conference schedule, and we're going to see some obvious differences here right off the bat, of course. Last year, one of the biggest games of the season that a lot of people were pointing at was the Georgia versus Alabama game. Georgia and Alabama are both in the SEC, but because they're in opposite divisions, they don't play every season. They play about once every 5 or 6 years, depending on how the schedule rotates. And sometimes we added Missouri and Texas A&M. That extended the rotation out a little bit. But anyway, if you follow college football, you kind of understand how the rotation works within the SEC. Georgia plays one opponent, Auburn, from the opposite division every single year. Every team from the East plays one team from the West every single year. For Georgia, it's Auburn. For Tennessee, it's Alabama. And then your 8th conference game rotates around the other 6 Western Division opponents if you're an Eastern team. That team this year for Georgia is Arkansas. Again, this is something that's going to be out of the norm because we did play Arkansas last year. We weren't supposed to, but when they redid the schedule to a 10-game conference schedule, Arkansas was a team from the West that got added to Georgia's schedule. And they gave Georgia a little bit of a scare week 1 last year. They were actually leading Georgia in the first half of that game. Of course, they had Sam Pittman, first-year head coach there. Bad year to be a first-year head coach last year with no real offseason, no real conditioning programs, no spring ball. It was hard for new coaches, I think, last year to get things implemented because you had such limited time with your players. I thought Sam Pittman did pretty good with what he had to work with at Arkansas last year. Georgia did end up kind of running away with that game in the second half, but still, Arkansas, I think, was a lot better last year than anybody thought they would be. You look at their win total, and it might not reflect that. I think they finished with 2 or 3 wins. But this is a team, Arkansas, that hadn't won an SEC game in 2 full seasons. I think it was 2018 or 2017 was the last time they had won an SEC game until this past season. So they did surprise some people. So Georgia's Western opponents this year, home against Arkansas on October 2nd. And then we play, of course, our traditional Western opponent, Auburn, on the road at Auburn on October 9th. So we actually have our 2 Western opponents in back-to-back games here. October 2nd at home, Arkansas, and then on the road at Auburn on October 9th. Those are the 2 Western opponents. And then we play the other 6 SEC Eastern teams, starting with South Carolina at home on September 18th. New coaching staff there. Got to assume, again, this is a situation where we know anything can happen. Hell, it was only a couple of years ago South Carolina beat Georgia in Athens. I'm sure everybody remembers that. You could type about it down below to remind me if you need to. But Yeah, South Carolina came in and beat a top 5 Georgia team in Athens the last time they played in Athens. Georgia was a big favorite in that game. They'll be a big favorite in this game too. Yes, I know anything can happen. Again, this isn't a prediction video, just stating the obvious here. Georgia should be a significant favorite at home in their first SEC game of the year when they host South Carolina. Then they get their first road SEC game of the year the following week, September 25th at Vandy. Vandy, another team with a new coaching staff, and let's just be honest, inferior talent to almost the entirety of the SEC. They have the strictest academic requirements in all the SEC, and they don't have anywhere near the tradition in football that some of the other schools in the SEC do. Vandy fights an uphill battle every single year. I don't know anybody that just hates Vandy, maybe Tennessee fans because of the in-state rivalry thing. No fun to pick on Vandy, but again, a situation here where Georgia should be a significant favorite in that game. Then you got Arkansas and Auburn, already talked about that. Then we come back home, take on Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's a team that I do think will be better this year than they were last year. Again, this isn't a prediction video. I'm not getting into making predictions here, whether it be about Kentucky's season in general or about this Georgia-Kentucky game. This is kind of just an overview here. Again, I like to look at, okay, do I think the teams we're playing are going to be better or worse than they were last year? Do I think Georgia's going to be better or worse than last year? I think Georgia will be a little bit better than they were last year, particularly on offense with JT Daniels hopefully playing the entire season this go-around instead of waiting till the season's over to put him in like Kirby did last year in his infinite wisdom. Kentucky, similar situation. They had some quarterback issues last year. They rotated a little bit. They tried the Joey Gatewood thing, the Terry Wilson thing. Never really could get anything to click. Remember Georgia playing Kentucky last year. I don't think Kentucky even attempted a single pass more than 6 yards downfield. I expect that to change some this year. You got to open the offense up a little bit more than that. You got to take more chances than that. Even if you're not great at throwing the ball, you have to try to at least keep defenses honest and make them believe that you're at least willing to do it every once in a while. I think we'll see more of that from Kentucky this year. I think they'll be a little bit better. Again, it's a home game for Georgia. Georgia will be a significant favorite. We'll see what happens when the game is played. That takes us into Georgia's bye week. Georgia's bye week comes at a good time almost every single year because we get it before the Florida game, which happens to fall at about the midway point of the season. So when you only have one bye week, a good time to have it is either right before your biggest game of the year, which a lot of times is this Florida game, or right in the middle of the season. So you can sort of break it up, get a chance to rest some guys after the first 5 or 6 games of the year. Georgia gets sort of the best of both worlds here. We get a bye week before our traditional neutral site rivalry game against Florida, and it happens to also come in the middle of the year. Florida game, October 30th, neutral site, Jacksonville. Florida, of course, beat Georgia last year. Really, the game was over in the second quarter. Florida jumped out to a big lead in the first half. Second half, Georgia played a lot better, especially on defense. We held Florida scoreless in the second half. Well, not scoreless, but they didn't score a touchdown second half. I think they had a field goal or maybe 2. So played better in the second half, but the game was over at halftime. Kyle Trask and company came out and just absolutely lit Georgia up in the first half of that game. Now, Florida loses about 95% of its offensive production from last year. The quarterback is gone. The top 3 wide receivers are gone. They've got some work to do on offense. I am notoriously not a fan of Emory Jones. It's nothing personal. It's not that I don't like him for any particular reason. I just don't think he's very good. We're going to find out this year whether I'm right or wrong, because it looks like he's going to be the guy in Gainesville this year, Emory Jones. He's been there a long, long time, but hasn't got a whole lot of playing time. Now, Dan Mullen does put him in the game each of the last 2 seasons, mostly to run the ball, sort of like a Tim Tebow type of situation when he was offensive coordinator at Florida back in the late 2000s under Urban Meyer. He's going to have to throw the ball obviously a lot more this year if he's the starting quarterback, which I expect he will be. He's going to have to throw the ball a lot more this year than he has in years past. During his career at Florida, he's about a 50% passer. I would be surprised if he improves on that all that much. I just don't think he's a very accurate passer of the football. Again, find out this year. This isn't a prediction video. I do think Georgia will be a little bit better, especially on offense, than they were last year. And I think Florida probably takes a step back. I mean, you can't lose what is arguably one of the best offenses they've ever had. I mean, Kyle Trask broke a bunch of records last year. Hard to lose all those points, that talent, all that production off that offense with the quarterback gone and all the wide receivers. Hard to lose all that. Put a guy in Emory Jones with a bunch of brand new receivers and cross your fingers and hope that things just go as well as they did in 2020. I don't see it happening. I don't think Florida's going to be terrible. I don't think we're going to see one of these like 4-8 seasons that Florida seems to have once every 5 or 6 years or whatever. but hard to imagine them being quite as good as they were last year. Georgia's a little bit better. Who will be favored in that game? Toss up right now, in my opinion. It depends who looks better the first 4 or 5 games of the year. Florida offensively probably will get better as the year goes along. You'd have to imagine Emory Jones maybe a little shaky in his first start and kind of gets more comfortable as the season goes along. Florida could be rolling by this point in the season. Who knows? But I think this will be obviously a good game, rivalry game right in the middle of the season, the cocktail party. It's one of those games. If you're a college football fan, whether you like Georgia or Florida or not, if you're a college football fan, you watch this game, right? So that's Georgia, Florida. Then we come back home, take on Missouri. Missouri's another team that I think is sneaky good in 2021. Sneaky good in that they're I think, going to be better than almost anybody thinks they will be. I think it's possible Missouri could be the second best team in the SEC East. I think it's more likely they finish third. Clearly, if I had to pick right now, I'd probably pick them to finish third in the East. But if they're a little bit better than even I think they'll be, I could see a scenario where they end up finishing second in the SEC East. Now, Georgia has dominated Missouri since they came into the SEC 9-10 years ago, whatever it's been. Missouri has only beat Georgia one time so far, and we play every year since they entered the SEC. They've had better luck against Florida. I think Missouri is 5-6 against Florida. So maybe they've been in there 11 years now. Does that sound right? Are they 5-6 or 4-5? They're one game under 500. They were 500 against Florida until this past season, and then Florida beat them. So whereas Georgia, on the other hand, is 8-1, 9-1, whatever it is, something like that against them. And I do think Missouri will be a lot better. They're year 2 now in a new coaching staff. Again, they were a team that suffered more than most last year with the COVID restrictions in the offseason. When you have a new coaching staff and you're implementing new offensive schemes and philosophies, basically having no offseason at all, I mean, that's got to be really, really difficult. I expect Missouri to take a pretty big step forward in 2021. Will it be good enough to win the East or compete for the SEC? Probably not. But I do think they're one of those teams that could be sneaky good. It's a home game for Georgia. I think Georgia will be a favorite there, but that could be a potential slip-up game there for Georgia. In fact, if I had to pick something that you would consider a quote-unquote trap game on Georgia's schedule, I think Missouri fits the definition of a trap game perfectly. It's the week after Georgia's biggest game of the season, at least this year, in the SEC anyway. Maybe you say the Clemson game is big, two top 5 teams. Possible Florida's in the top 5 when this game is played too, though. But it's right after our rivalry game against Florida. Then you got to turn around and play Missouri, a team that, people just don't get that excited about Missouri. And then after Missouri, we play on the road at Tennessee. Again, a team that has struggled lately. Georgia has owned that series over the last 10 or 15 years, but it's still considered a pretty big game within the SEC, at least to Georgia fans it is. I'm just going to be honest with you. Georgia fans, I think, still consider that Tennessee game to be a pretty big game. Having Missouri sandwiched right there between Florida and a road trip to Tennessee has the potential for some disaster. So if you're trying to look on every team's schedule and find the one game where you go, okay, Georgia's definitely better than Missouri. I think everybody would agree there. They're more talented. They should win that game. They'll be a significant favorite. But then you look at where it falls on the schedule and you go, well, maybe they catch Georgia sleeping that week. It's possible. So I would consider Missouri sort of a trap game type scenario. At Tennessee the following week, again, new coaching staff there with Tennessee. It seems like we're saying that every 3 or 4 years. Why does it seem that way? Because we are saying that every 3 or 4 years. This is their 5th coach in the last 12 years. Philip Fulmer in 07, and then Lane Kiffin, and then then Derek Dooley. So Fulmer, Dooley, Kiffin, Butch Jones, Jeremy Pruitt, now Josh Heupel. How many coaches is that? So a lot of coaches. It hasn't worked out for any of them. Tennessee in a bad spot right now, of course. They lost 25 players, 25 to the transfer portal. Add that to the 20 or 25 that you automatically lose every year to graduation, or a player has used up his eligibility, or whatever the case. And Tennessee is basically entering the 21 season with half of what they had last year. Now they've done some stuff through the transfer portal. Of course, they have a recruiting class coming in and an all-new coaching staff too. But Tennessee, again, this isn't a trash talk video. Tennessee's going to have a rough year, I think, in 2021. They don't have a whole lot of talent. In my opinion, the best player on the offense and the best player on the defense that would have been coming back this year both transferred out. it's going to be an uphill battle for Tennessee this year. Georgia will be favored, but again, anything can happen. I'm not here to tell anybody that Georgia's definitely beating Tennessee 100-0. That's not the point of these videos. Anybody with any sense, though, will tell you again, Georgia likely a significant favorite in that game. Then we have the last 2 games of the year, which are 2 of the non-con games we talked about earlier, home against Charleston Southern and on the road at Georgia Tech. Should Georgia run through that schedule with a good enough record to win their division, then the SEC title game, of course, would be Saturday, December 4th in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Overall, I'm going to say this schedule is actually easier than, a little bit easier than last year's schedule. Last year, we only played 10 games. This year, we played 12, but all 10 of those games were SEC games. This year, we only have the 8 SEC games. We do have to play Clemson, which is a top 5 opponent. We played 2 top 5 opponents last year and lost to both of them, Alabama and Florida. That Clemson game is every bit as tough as the game Georgia had last year at Alabama. Where we kind of make things up, we don't have to play Alabama this year. I don't think Florida is going to be quite as good this year as they were last year. The opponent we draw on the rotation from the West is Arkansas. They're in the bottom half of the SEC West, right? You talk about Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, probably best 3 teams in the West next year. Then you look at Auburn, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and try to figure out where they fall in the pecking order. Pretty lucky draw there, right? Do have to go on the road to play Auburn, but they've got a brand new coaching staff. Auburn does. Did I skip the Auburn game when I was going through? I might have. Play on the road at Auburn. New coaching staff at Auburn. Auburn, another team that I think is in a transition year. Not necessarily a rebuilding year, right? Tennessee, I would put in the rebuilding category. Auburn, transition year. It's fun to sort of pick on the Barners, and we do a lot of that here on this channel. Auburn's not a terrible team. Gus Malzahn was sort of a victim of his own success. I mean, he did win the West. He did win the SEC once back in 2013, whatever it was. Won the West again in 2017. Beat Alabama enough times to keep his job, probably a little longer than he should have. He had the notorious loss to Central Florida in the Peach Bowl, and he had just an abysmal record against Georgia. And that's why he's no longer there. New coaching staff. They do have some talent to work with at Auburn, though. How much talent? How good can they be? I don't know. This is a game that if Georgia's not careful, they could lose it. Auburn seems to always have a pretty good defense. Offense has kind of been Auburn's issue the last couple of years, it seemed like. So we'll see. I don't think that's a gimme by any means. Again, if I was guessing right now, I would say Georgia, if they were going to play tomorrow, Georgia would probably be a 7 to 10 point favorite in that game. But they're not playing tomorrow. They're not playing until October 9th. So we'll see. Definitely not a gimme, but a situation where it looks like Georgia probably a little bit better, at least on paper right now. We'll see what the teams look like when the season kicks off. So at Auburn, as opposed to last year, we got them at home. Okay, play Clemson this year. No non-con games last year. We avoid Alabama in the regular season this year, although likely to meet again in the SEC title game if Georgia makes it there. At Tennessee, rebuilding with a new coaching staff. At Auburn, rebuilding with a new coaching staff. At Vanderbilt, rebuilding with a new coaching staff. Those are our 3 SEC road games. You can't ask for much better than that if you're looking for a path to Atlanta and the SEC title game. Again, our 3 SEC road games are at Vandy, new coaching staff, at Auburn, new coaching staff, at Tennessee, new coaching staff. You got to win those games. We have a 4th game at Georgia Tech, not a new coaching staff, but again, a team that has struggled over the last few years. And we have the neutral site game against Clemson. Overall, I think this is a favorable schedule for Georgia. Does Georgia have to win week 1 against Clemson? No, of course they don't. If Georgia loses to Clemson, especially if it's close, and then finishes 11-1 and wins the SEC title game, 12-1 with a loss to Clemson, Georgia's going to be in the playoffs, period. Where I think Georgia's quote-unquote needs the win against Clemson is more of a psychological deal with Georgia, right? It would be nice for Georgia to get a big win here. Georgia seems to me like a team that needs that right now. They need sort of something to kickstart them. What a great win that would be if Georgia can get it. It would be a great win for Clemson, too, if they can get it. Traditional rival going back to even the 80s. Don't play that often anymore. Georgia and Clemson played twice in the 2000s, twice in the 2010s. Georgia was 3-1 in those 4 games. Now we're starting up another series here for the 2020s. We actually play Clemson 4 or 5 times between now and 2024. Play a couple of home and homes, couple of neutral site games, deals. So plenty of opportunities for Georgia and Clemson to get it on over the next several years, plus 2 teams that likely to meet the playoffs at some point if current trajectories continue. But that'll be a great game. Overall, though, I do think this path is a little easier this year, at least to get to Atlanta than it was last year, mainly because we don't have to play Alabama in the regular season. And I think Florida takes a little bit of a step back this year, which, of course, makes winning the East a little bit easier for Georgia. And I think Georgia will be a little bit better with JT Daniels playing all season, hopefully barring some type of injury. There you go. Schedule analysis for Georgia 2021. Again, let me know down below what teams you'd like me to do. We can probably do this for several weeks. I don't know. I don't know if I would do it every day, but I could do 3 or 4 days a week easily. So let me know if there's some teams you want to hear me talk about. Let me know down below. Again, it won't be a prediction video. It'll be just a straight schedule analysis. Give me some suggestions down below on what you want to hear. It's Friday afternoon as I'm recording this. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'm going to live stream tomorrow on Saturday around 2 o'clock. So check it out. Come hang out 2 o'clock right here on this channel. I'll have a live stream tomorrow. We'll go for an hour and a half or so, a couple hours. After that, I'm going to end that stream and have a Patreon stream to do after that. So lots of live streaming tomorrow. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up if you haven't already. And I'll see you again real soon. Have a good morning.